I'm going to introduce then Dr. Danesh, who's going to speak on the marriage of equals, creative integration of love and power. Without any further ado, I'll give you Dr. Hossain Danesh.
Allah for the offense. Thank you, John. A number of us, a small number of us, are gathering together here to start a new undertaking in our attempts as Baha'is to bring together, to integrate the teachings of the faith on the one hand and the scientific discoveries and truths on the other hand in yet another field of human endeavor, this time in the area of marriage and family. And it is a very, very important thing to do because marriage exists in all cultures and family exists in all cultures. And it has existed from the beginning of the socialization of mankind. And it doesn't look as though we are going to succeed in creating a society without marriage and family. All indications are that that process is going to continue. And because of that, we need to do some serious study of what we are going to do about the rather unfortunate situation that our families and marriages are right now. As you know, the marriages and marriages are breaking up at a very alarming rate around the world. As you know, many people who are married are very unhappy. And as you know, the families are becoming less and less of an exciting place to be in. And this is really the way that it's happening is alarming. And this also is not limited to any special group of people. All cultures, from all religious backgrounds, from all walks of life, people have difficulty to maintain the marriage. And the question comes, why? What is happening that we should face at this juncture in history of mankind, in the progress of humanity, this kind of difficulty? What I thought I would do today is to share with you some thoughts and experiences that I have gathered over a number of years working professionally in this field and also making a very conscious, deliberate effort to integrate the scientific and clinical side of my studies with a rather systematic attempt that I have made to study the writings of the faith about the marriage. As such, there are several things that I pursue. My presentation would be very incomplete. By no means it would be authoritative. And the ideas that I share are my personal ideas. And therefore, they should be taken as such. Furthermore, I'm very aware that this is a beginning attempt. And in the future, I probably would feel embarrassed when I listen to my faith if I decided to keep one of the ideas that I shared with you today, because this is what I'm doing every day. When I listen to my previous tapes, I just kind of beat up myself and say, why did I say this and that and so forth. But that's the process. What can you do? That's the way that we as human beings evolve and grow. So I want you to take what I say in that context. I think I would start by giving you a rather classical history of a marriage, the way I have experienced it over a number of years in the clinical setting. As a marriage therapist and a family therapist, I have had the opportunity to study many marriages and the processes that they develop in the clinical setting. And this report of a life history of a marriage may help us in what we are trying to understand. Typically, when people come, or those who came for consultation to me, typically, majority of them would be women. The women comes, and usually the person is in a state of considerable anxiety, tension, and happiness. The history that the individual gives is a variety of this background that I shared with you. Either the person says, I have fallen out of love with my husband, I no longer love him, I cannot even allow myself to be touched by him, and I am very distressed by this because he is such a marvelous person, he is such a kind person, he has been so nice over the years, we have had such a good relationship, and I am totally puzzled why I should feel such a strong negative feeling toward this person who is so nice and who everybody else says is so nice. Okay? That's one group of people who come and share their thoughts. Another group of people come in a state of considerable tension because they have fallen in love with someone else. That's what they describe. They say, I have fallen in love with another person, I have had a relationship with this individual, and this, of course, has created enormous difficulty for my marriage and my situation, and I'm now caught in the situation that I cannot live either with the husband or with this person. And again, a state of conflict arises. A third group of people, a variation of this whole process, is when the individual comes and says that she and her husband argue and fight all the time. Not necessarily about important things, but little things, about nonsensical things. But their lives are just full of tension and difficulty because of that. And finally, group of people who come who say that they are depressed. Life is meaningless for them. They don't feel very happy about their life. They don't know why. Everything seems to be okay. Everything seems to be in order. But nevertheless, their life is very unhappy and they don't know why. So that these are variations of complaints and difficulties that people bring to an office of someone who is engaged in treatment and counseling for marriage problems. There are two other variations that are worth mentioning. One, you see a husband and wife who come, and it's obvious that one of them has dragged the other one to the setting. And they come and they sit there, and one of them says to the other and say, you wanted it, you talk. Okay. And it is very clear, it's absolute tension, difficulty between them. And the other one, you say, I didn't want to be here, I just have come, and you say whatever you want to say. Say your piece, and let's go. That's one group, and that's not very uncommon group. I would say about 20% of people who would come, they would come under those circumstances. And usually, again, the wife has dragged the husband there and say, you come or else. And then you find another group of people, and this time are men who come and complain about how unhappy they are about their marriage and so forth. But usually, generally speaking, not many of them, many men, come for that kind of conflict. Now that's a very important point, because as we study this life history, we would see why it is important. So here we have an individual or a couple who have come because they are in one way or another dissatisfied with their marriage. So the next thing that we have to do is kind of take a life history of these individuals and see what has happened, the history of their marriage. And it is remarkable that most of the time, the scenario is the same. It's very similar, the history that they would provide you. The history, especially in the North American culture, in the context of the North American society, and especially in the middle class, which is the bulk of the society, the scenario is something like this. The husband and wife, both of them rather well educated, or at similar levels of education. Usually the husband a little bit ahead, but not much, at the time of marriage than his wife. They come together, they meet each other in the context of either university or work, and they fall in love. And by falling in love, they mean that they see the other person, they get very excited about the special qualities that the other person has, the way that he or she looks, the color of their eyes, the way they smile, the way that they talk about themselves, the fact that they are willing to sit there and talk for hours. These are the initial elements of love, falling in love. It is very important, because later on the complaint comes that he never talks. And this is exactly the person, and this is exactly the couple who before the marriage, they sat around and talked, and they thought that isn't that marvelous? Finally, I have found somebody that I can share my thoughts and feelings with. So what happens is that in the process of falling in love, the individuals find out a number of things about each other. First of all, they find that they are mutually attracted to each other. They find each other's physical qualities as well as personalities attractive. The second thing is that they would feel that they mutually satisfy some of the basic needs that they have. We as human beings have, especially when we are young, we have a number of basic needs. we need to be appreciated as a unique person. We need somebody to tell us that we are marvelous, we are magnificent, we are the best person that they ever have seen, and all of those kind of things that we need to be, And even when they're telling us, and we are doubtful that possibly it's not all that true, and it could be that it's a little bit exaggerated, but nevertheless it's nice that this person is telling you all of these nice things. It says, oh, you're the, smartest guy that I've seen, or you're the most beautiful person that I've, observed, and so forth, and that really feels good. So there is a mutual gratification of needs that they have. Also, there is a need to take away from our loneliness, take away from our doubts, from our isolation, from our confusion in life, and all of those things. So, the combination of these two qualities, the mutual attraction and the mutual gratification of needs, becomes so powerful that the individuals fall in love. And by falling in love means that they become preoccupied with the other person. They need the other person. They have to have the other person in order to feel complete. Because somehow the deficiencies that they have about themselves, or the doubts that we have about ourselves, those somehow, at least temporarily, are being fulfilled and put aside by this in other individual, the way that he responds and the way that she relates to, and so forth. So that's what happens, and it is a falling in love process. Now, what happens, however, is a tragic situation follows. And the tragic situation is this, that attraction to qualities of another human being very soon also is, to a large extent or lesser or greater extent, nullified by a discovery that not everything about this individual is attractive after all. That the person has peculiar habits, that the person chews and makes noise when chewing his food, or snores at night, or the way that uses the toothpaste is the wrong way, or the way that the number of hours that she spends to put lipstick is too much, or God knows what. But there are discoveries that nullify that attraction. So there are forces of attraction and forces of repulsion at work at the same time. And consequently, that complete closeness that existed at the beginning begins to go further and further and further. In many marriages, it reaches a level of equilibrium that the husband and wife can be this close, but not more, and this far and not more. And that is okay. It allows them to function for a period of time. So what happens, what keeps the couple together during this period of time, no longer is necessarily their attraction to each other, but the areas of mutuality that exist between them. For example, many marriages stay together because of economic considerations. It's easier to have two individuals living together. It's cheaper. It's easier for the day-to-day cares of the house and so forth, especially for men. And therefore they are willing to stay with it and keep it. That's one process, the mutuality that exists between people. Another aspect of the mutuality is that the husband and wife begin to have projects together. Let's buy a color television, let's buy a car, let's buy a home. And that process keeps them together. They work really hard, day and night, to buy a house. And they feel very close. They see each other for a few minutes and so forth, but they are very close. Once they move in the house, they start fighting. Because no longer that mutuality exists. Then the most powerful mutuality that comes for them are the children. They begin to have children. And the children keeps them together. So what happens here is that aside from that initial moment that the two become very attracted to each other and they are together because of that initial attraction, that for the following decades, staying together primarily because they have mutuality of objectives, be it socio-economic objectives, be it children, be it other things. It's that kind of a circle of friends, a community of people, a church, whatever it is, keeps them together. Now that's very interesting because this gives us a clue about what really love is all about. People think that love is a process of two individuals like this coming together. This individual and that individual are attracted to each other and come closer and closer to each other. And they get closer and closer and closer until they're totally together. Okay? This is the ideal that we are looking for. And that's the reason that in the previous societies, and in many societies still around the world, we had polygamy. The whole notion of polygamy, one aspect of it was a constant search of the right person. Okay? And in our society, in the North American society, we have this serial monogamy. You have one girlfriend and then you are going to study with that girlfriend, so you stay with that girlfriend for 5 months. So then you drop that girlfriend and the next one, or the boyfriend and the next one. And from the very beginning of adolescence, the parents adults teach the children that you just experiment with people, one after another. And that experimentation now is continuing in a marriage. You get married with one person and it doesn't work, you drop that person and go with another person and just go on, you see. And the whole idea of living together for a while, and if it didn't work, you drop it and you start with somebody else. You don't have all the troubles of the papers and this and that. This mentality is the mentality that comes as a result of a misconception of what love is all about. One of the difficult times that I had for a long period of my studies was to understand the fundamental point that Abdul Baha had raised in his several discourses on love. That doesn't mean that now I understand it, but at least it's beginning to allow me to see the whole picture a little bit differently. Because the way Abdul Baha defines love is quite different from the way that anywhere else I had seen the love relationship being defined. Abdul Baha defines the love of those two individuals to each other as being only possible through the love of God. He said that you love the other individual through love of God. Now that's a very important statement, because he says just before that statement that what people usually call love is not in reality love, but is a mere fascination with the other individual. That's what I described earlier that people call falling in love, is a very strong process of being fascinated with other person. And this fascination, people mistake it for love. Now, Abdul-Baha defines love process, a process in which you love the other individual through love of God. So what you have a point of mutuality. The husband loves God, the wife loves God, and through that love, they love each other. This is very important because that's exactly what you notice in marriages in general, only at a much, much more limited form. When the husband and wife love each other through their socio-economic mutuality, or they love each other through their children, or they love each other because of the forces of society dictates that they stay together, the mutuality that is there is also a mutual point of attraction for them. The only thing is that in the context of the definition by Abdul-Baha, the mutual attraction goes far beyond anything that we have seen. Okay? And that is the essential point here. Now, so what happens, going back to our life history, what happens is that the individual begins, the couple begin, they fall in love, and soon after that they discover that, my God, this is not exactly what I wanted, but by then they have committed themselves already to a certain degree of mutuality, and they have to stick together, and as a result of that process, 10 years, 15 years goes by in which these individuals are living a life that is not very effective, but nevertheless is there, and they have to follow it. After 10, 15 years, that's the time that something happens. Something happens very dramatic. During this period of time, the husband usually has great opportunities for his social, personal development. He continues his education. He continues to work as where he has been working. He becomes more known, more accepted. He socializes more. He gains more power, economic power and otherwise. And because he's with other women and so forth in the workplace, he has a higher level of self-assurance, gratification of the needs that we have to be told that we are marvelous and this and that and so forth. While the woman, the wife, stays home, becomes isolated, doesn't have the opportunity to develop her education, socially feels more clumsy, feels less able to communicate with people. At the level of ideological development, feels less up to date as the husband is. Doesn't have the opportunity to go out and socialize with men and women and have interactions and so forth. And begins to build up a considerable sense of resentment, doubt, self-doubt, inferiority, and so forth, which they gradually begin to affect her. And the way that they affect her are very slow, insidious, or could be very fast and sudden. One or the other, both are seen happening. The breaking point, in a sense, the turning point, it shouldn't be called breaking as much as the turning point, is when the wife, for the first time, suddenly has some degree of freedom and power than has had for the previous 5, 7, 10 years or so in the marriage. For example, the children begin to go on a full-time to school. Or the wife decides to go back to work or to school. Or the husband gets tired from the job and therefore his overall status of power collapses. Okay? Or the husband becomes involved with somebody else and comes and tells his wife, and then the wife has a sense of much greater moral superiority and power over the husband, or something like that happens. And the equilibrium of the marriage changes. And the wife feels more free. And it is at that time that a phenomenon takes place which is very interesting. The woman escapes from the confines of the marriage as though the marriage was a prison. Okay. The escape can be symbolic or can be actual. Symbolic, meaning in the way that the person thinks and so forth. Actual means actually leaving home and going. I have seen that happening over and over in the clinical setting, people coming. So much so that we can now identify a prison mentality very clearly characterizing many marriages. Many marriages of the contemporary world is a marriage in which the whole setting is a prison. The woman is the prisoner, and the man is the prison guard. Therefore, both of them spend most of their lives in the prison. Okay? And preoccupied with the prison. The only thing is that one is the prisoner and the other one is the prison guard. As you know, those who have studied the psychology of prisons, the psychology of the prisoner and the prison guard are very much different. Okay? The dynamics are very similar. The prisoner can function in several different ways. Can be a model prisoner, a good prisoner, a kindly prisoner, a cooperative prisoner. Or could be a nasty and complaining prisoner that needs to be punished constantly and the allowances to be taken away from him and so forth, so that wouldn't be so imprudent to even think of disobeying the prison guard, who is the master there and is in control. Furthermore, there is an ongoing, constant power struggle between the guard and the prisoners. The prisoner devises all kinds of devious ways of getting at the prisoner, the prison guard. And many times prison guard finds himself caught in a situation that doesn't matter what he would do, he would come out as a fool. And it makes them very angry, and it goes on to demand more and more of that prisoner. This prisoner mentality is so commonly found in many marriages that when you describe it to people, they begin to identify that, yeah, that's the way that it happens. That's the way it occurs. Now, the other thing is that many of the prisoners need to be in prison. Okay? We know in our criminal studies of the criminal society, that many prisoners, they are model prisoners in the prison. You let them out, they go out, they rob another bank, or they beat on somebody else, or they kill somebody else, and they bring them back. They come back, they're again model prisoners, and so forth. Okay? So many people find the security of the prison very nice. After all, in the prison, you don't need to worry about mortgage. You don't need to worry about being late to work. You don't need to worry about snow shoveling in the east. You don't need to be worried about all kinds of daily activities, cooking, where the next meal would come from. What about if somebody broke into my house tonight? All of those things. You're free from all of those things. You have ample time on your hands to do whatever you want to do. And that's the reason that so many husbands come and say, what have you been doing all day here? You don't have anything to do. And they say, oh, I wish I was like women, I had all this time on my hands and I could do anything that I wanted to do. And we men have to go and work hard. And still these women expect us that when we come home, that we should go and help them to cook and wash the dishes and clean and talk to them. And, I have been tired all day. We say, men say, I have come here to put my feet up and to read my newspaper, to watch my television, to eat my meal, hot meal, of course. And what is this? The woman is expecting all this kind of, demand. This whole phenomena, of course, is because of the characteristics of the household and the similarities that it has, the way that we have created it to prison. Why is that? One of the reasons is, of course, that we don't know how to deal with power. You see, earlier I spoke about love and the pitfalls of love and misunderstanding and misconceptions that we have had about love. Now here we are talking about power. We don't know how to deal with power either. Power is that quality that can be used or abused, or not used. Majority of people, and here we're talking about men, majority of men, they learn to abuse power. They abuse power in an authoritarian way. The authoritarian way of you. We have intellectual power, we have all kind of creative powers, we have all kind of capacities. These powers that they had were totally dissipated as a result of them fighting with each other, arguing with each other, being disappointed with one another, and with their lives. And that was the process. Now, in human society, the predominant forms of use of power or abuse of power are in indulgent and authoritarian forms. There is no other form that usually you find in predominant used in the society. The challenge that is before a family, a marriage, is to find yet another way of use of power in human relations. And that's where the study of the writings of the Baha'i faith becomes extremely important, because there is a third way of use of power that usually even you don't find the reference to it in the literature, because it hasn't become a part of the consciousness. So, we go back to the case history that we had. What happened then is that as soon as the wife had some measure of power in the context of this marriage that has been like a prison, she has a flight. And the flight takes the following forms. Some women leave and never come back. They begin to hate their husbands and all who look like their husbands, meaning men. And they just simply don't want to do anything with these people any longer. Or they go and get involved in a number of other relationships. Or they go out and have a little period of freedom, get frightened, and come back. But there is this flight from this prison of the marriage. Now, traditionally, the treatment of these problems have been to analyze the characteristics of the individual and the characteristics of the relationship. But I like to put forward to you that these solutions are not by any means sufficient. Because what we are dealing here, we are dealing with a fundamental need for change in the structure of human relationships, and particularly in the structure of the marriage and then consequently of the family. The marriages of the past and of the present have been marriages of unequals. Men and women in the marriages have not been equal. By and large, in the marriages of today and of the past, men have had upper hand. Occasionally, women, by virtue of their family background and money and those kind of things, or their personality, force of their personality, they have upper hand. But nevertheless, it hasn't been a marriage of equals. It has been a marriage of people with different levels of power and autonomy and capacity and knowledge and everything. In the marriage of unequals, you create a prison mentality. You create conditions of injustice. You create circumstances in which people feel that they are being cheated. In such a marriage, resentment prevails. In such a marriage, disagreement is profound. In such a marriage, there is a constant, ongoing sense of injustice, of power struggle, and so on. And if not, in such a marriage, there is condition of resignation on the part of one or the other. And say, okay, I would have a better life next life. And I just let it go. I give up. Okay? So, sometimes, and that's not very infrequent, sometimes women in these marriages choose a totally different way of life. They begin to enrich their inner life. They begin to focus on their inner processes, on their spiritual dimension, on their emotional life. They become remarkable people as far as insights into suffering of other human beings is concerned. They become remarkable as far as their understanding of difficulties of others and themselves are concerned. They become remarkable as far as their spiritual insights are concerned. They become excellent writers. They become excellent in many, many ways in the fields of arts and so forth. Those you also find. And that's the reason that so many marriages of inequality, of unequal marriages of the past and the present, still are so creative, because the two individuals basically live separate lives. And they each, by virtue of being marvelous people that they are, they evolve and grow in one area. The husband evolves and grows in this respect, the wife evolves and grows in that respect. They really, the two are very separate from each other. But they have a profound respect for each other and say, yeah, this is him, or yeah, this is her. And that's the extent that goes, but they totally accept the other person and allow that person to grow. But nevertheless, the opportunities have been unequal, the circumstances have been circumstances equality, and the chances that they would have had in an equal marriage, they of course don't have here because of the circumstances. And it is really to them that they create such a profound and meaningful life and constructive life, so to say. These are the people who throughout centuries have kept the institution of marriage working, and they're keeping the institution of marriage working right now. But that doesn't mean that we have to be satisfied with that reality. The challenge before us is to create marriage of equals. The challenge before us is to begin to experiment with the processes which are required for creating a marriage of equals. In a marriage of equals, then the love and the power, being instead of being in the opposite pole, they become integrated with each other. And whenever you integrate love and power with each other, you are in possession of the most magnificent creative forces. It is then that you become very creative. It is then that you begin to feel free to express your thoughts, your emotions, and your feelings. It is then that you have the freedom, and you feel the freedom of relating to other people and not to be frightened. It is in that context that the issue of chastity simply becomes a passport to freedom. I tell you how that happens, because it's very important. Because men and women have been unequal, because the relationships of the past also have been based on the earlier levels of maturity of mankind, namely childhood and adolescence, men and women relationships have been highly sexualized and continue to be very sexualized relationships. In a sexualized relationship, you either get involved in the power struggle, like many do, or you become embedded in those circumstances and situations that you have to have a lot of laws, a lot of regulations of how to talk with the other person, how to relate to the other person, how to smile, how to do this, how to do that, what kind of deodorants, and the whole thing is necessary, because you are engaged in a relationship that there are no inner boundaries for it, and therefore you have to create the outer boundaries for it. What Baha'u'llah has called upon us to do, he has called upon us to start a relationship between men and women, which is mature rather than adolescent, which is based on a creative relationship rather than authoritarian or indulgent type of relationship, which is chaste, which means that it would not abuse the love relationship. Once you do that, then you can love the other person. Once you do that, men and women can love each other, can be friends with each other, can relate to each other, can trust each other without needing to be married and having sex. Okay? Because you now have freedom. Within the context of chastity, you have freedom. Freedom is always related to the process in which you have a control. Because as soon as you give up your control, you have lost your freedom. For example, I am free to raise my hand here, or have it down here, or there, or there, or there. Okay? But as soon as I put it up there, no longer I have that freedom. It's gone. Because I have it there. Okay? But when I hadn't done that, when I had a control over it, then there was a freedom. I have a freedom to drink or not to drink. But as soon as I drink, I no longer have a freedom because the alcohol goes in my brain cells, sits there, and starts governing my functions. No longer I have the freedom. The freedom, it is in the context of discipline, of creative self-discipline. In the context of the man and woman relationship, when equality and chastity come hand in hand together, would allow men and women to become friends in a manner that never has happened in the history of society before. And in that kind of a situation, we are going to have new discoveries of the ways that we can integrate love and power. And in that process, we are going to have marriages which are going to be totally unique. We haven't experienced it. We don't know how they would be. So what I am suggesting here is that when we are going to start a section on family and marriage studies, we should begin to think along these lines and many other creative lines that I'm sure you are going to think about. But this is the objective, that we begin with imagination and with courage to look at these areas of human relationships in a totally unexpected new way. It is not sufficient for Baha'i to look at their marriage and say, let us have a marriage like good old times. There was no good old times as far as marriage is concerned that you can go back to it. We cannot say, let's have new approaches to sexuality like good old times, Victorian era. There was no good old time Victorian era sexuality if you really go and study the literature and everything and to see what happened behind the walls and the scenes and so forth there. It wasn't. Then syphilis was the scourge of the family. Then the sexual relationship between the close members of the family destroyed dynasties after dynasties after dynasties. Okay? Now, the AIDS diseases and herpes and syphilis and gonorrhea and all other kinds of sexually transmitted diseases that are going to come our way, they are going to become the plagues of the new society. These are all happening because we have lost the power, lost control over these processes of man and woman relationships. We are living in an adolescent society. The boundaries of control and discipline are collapsing. The new standards of relationship between men and women haven't yet been formulated. The concept of equality is just being verbalized, but not yet being practiced by any group of people. And these are the challenges that we have. We, as Baha'i, Baha'i professionals and otherwise. We have the challenges of beginning to look at these areas and talk about them, not in the terminology and expectations of the adolescent society in which we are living in, that everything goes and this and that, nor in the context of the old kind of the relationships that were there, new horizons that had to be discovered by us. So these are some of the objectives of the section on marriage and family studies. Our hope is that in the course of the day, we would have considerable consultation about these issues and other related issues. What can we do in our own marriage and family? What can we do vis-a-vis the role of the assemblies in helping the individuals? What can we do in bringing the scientific and the spiritual teachings and so forth, integrate them together? How could we go about all of these things? And this should be a part of our day-long consultation. In the latter part of today, my hope is that John and myself have been talking. Our hope is that we would be able to have a number of you, if you want, we all kind of establish the section. And we become members, the first members of the section on marriage and therapy, marriage and family studies. And then we would have beginning of conferences, of publications, of activities, of all kind of workshops and so forth, that gradually we would be able to get into studies of this very important, vital area of human affairs that we just right now are at the beginning of. So these are some thoughts and hopes about what we are together. So don't think that by so-called the keynote, the rest of the day is going to be just simply talking. Actually, our work now starts. I'm sorry that I took so much time, but anyway, I just carried away. Thank you.